Good morning, everyone in various parts of Canada. I've been to Canada a few times to work with various people who are on the call today, and I've always greatly enjoyed my visits to Canada, and it's a real it's always a great honour and privilege to work alongside colleagues in Canada. Since Scotland, the organisation I work with, we have a long history of connecting with colleagues in Canada, and one of the towering figures in our field is a man called John McGuinness. And many of you will have known John very well. And John came to Scotland many times in the early days when we were establishing our services and support systems in Scotland. And even today, our approaches to assessment and support planning are built around the developmental profile that John and his wife Jacqueline Trefry developed. So we've based an awful lot of our work around Canadian approaches. Now, I should also say at the start that and people will have heard me say this before, when I start talking about communication and deafblindness, I may begin to get excited by the topic, and my accent may get more and more I may talk faster and faster, and my accent may get stronger and stronger. So for the benefit of Denise and Tyler, who are interpreting, and for all of you, if I'm going too fast at any one time, then just remind me to slow down. One of the times I was in Canada, I think it was probably one of the trips to Vancouver, and the night before the conference or the presentation that I was delivering a talk at, someone said, "Oh, I really love a Scottish accent. I really love the way you talk. You could say anything from the podium tomorrow, and I would find it really enjoyable to listen to." And some of you may remember that I started a presentation with a telephone book that I had borrowed from the reception in the hotel, and I just started reading out telephone numbers in my Scottish accent. So I'm not going to do that today, but nevertheless, my accent may sometimes get strong or fast. So just tell me to slow down if that's the case. So yes, I've been to Canada a few times. I've been in Toronto and other parts of Ontario a few times. I've been in Winnipeg. I've been in Vancouver. And as I said, it's always a great honour to work with colleagues from Canada. So thank you for this invite to join you all this morning, or for me this evening. I'm happy for the presentation to be quite interactive, or as interactive as we really want it to be. I do have an agenda. I do have a talk and various topics to get through, but I'm also very happy to go different directions depending on topics that interest all of you today. So if you have questions, you can put them in the chat, and people will remind me that there are questions there. I'm also happy to take some questions if people want to speak those questions or come onto the screen. And at various parts during the talk, we're going to watch some film of interactions with people who are deafblind, and we're going to try to get some interaction, some video analysis going. I saw a message popping up from Linda there, and I remember that same pub crawl. We were talking about it earlier on when we were preparing this presentation. So yes, so we're we can be quite interactive if we want throughout the presentation, and so there will be time at the end for questions and answers. Well, questions, whether there'll be answers, that will be, we will see, but we can do questions and answers as we go through the presentation as well. So I will share my screen at various points to show some PowerPoint slides, and they're principally just if I'm introducing the name of a writer or something, just so that we get the spellings and all that correct. But I will also show some film throughout, so hopefully the technical aspects will all work. So I'm going to go straight in and begin sharing my screen at the moment, just to give you an idea of what we're going to speak about today. So hopefully we can now see. Can you now all see the get in the zone, revealing the exceptional in all of us? So that is the kind of overall title of what we're going to try to talk about today. And we were talking just 15 minutes before the presentation about where I'm talking from. So this is the little island that I live on in Scotland. It's just off the west coast of Scotland. The thing that the land you can see in the background is the mainland of Scotland, and I live on this little island here. And the beach you can see just towards the top right hand corner of the picture. I live right beside that beach. So that's just so you can picture where I'm talking to you from right at the moment. I'm sitting in my little music studio in a house not very far from there at the moment. So I said before, the talk is going to be called Revealing the Exceptional, Get in the Zone, Revealing the Exceptional in All of Us. And I'm going to join together some thinking from three main ideas. One is this so-called Zone of Proximal Development, and I will explore that more as we go through the presentation. I'm going to talk about a relatively recent publication from about 3 years ago from the Nordic Welfare Centre. It's part of a cognition network that exists, and has colleagues from across the Nordic countries, colleagues from the Netherlands, and colleagues from Scotland. And this publication is called Revealing Hidden Potentials, and it's about how we can assess cognition in individuals with congenital deafblindness. And finally, I'm going to refer to this fantastic book written by a father of a deafblind man, and he's entitled his book An Exceptional Fellow, and I'll explain and explore why I'm joining all these things together as we go through. So the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to stop sharing this screen so that I can share another screen in a minute. Just trying to get rid of a screen here. So a few years ago, I visited the Texas school for blind and visually impaired children and young people. And I did an interview with some colleagues there, including Robbie Bleha, who I think has been one of the presenters in your series of talks. And along with colleagues at the Texas school, we were exploring various aspects of communication. And I'm going to show a clip of one of the interviews, and I'm showing these clips because you can follow these up directly on the Texas School for the Blind and Visually Impaired website, and all of the links for everything I'm going to talk about today I have passed to Alana and others, so you will be able to follow up any of these talks. So I'm now going to hopefully share. So can people now see the a video saying Paul Hart seeing people as communication partners? If someone could let me know if that's on the screen at the moment, and then I will start playing it.
Yes.
Yep, excellent, thank you. So this clip only lasts 2 or 3 minutes.
I think it's about acknowledging anything that comes from a person as potentially communicative, and that doesn't mean that everything will become communicative, or some things could have just been the way somebody was moving. But I think our starting point should be to presume that somebody is attempting to make a connection with us, to tell us something, to reach out to us, and we could certainly respond in that way. And I think some examples, just even before language emerges, there's a piece of footage with myself working with a young woman who is deafblind, and we're doing some interactions based around movements that are really coming from her body. So there's wiggling of her toes, and sometimes a move of the head. And so we've got a really nice dialogue going around when she wiggles her toes, and I wiggle my fingers on top of the toes, and then she moves to the other foot and she wiggles those, and I think she's kind of keeping me on my toes. And then at another point she lifts her shoulder, and I touch the shoulder, but she does nothing else with it, but brings me back to the toes. And now when I look at that piece of video footage, I think the shoulder movement was just a readjustment in the chair, and that she wasn't saying, could you do this game up here? And her insistence seemed to be to get me back to the feet. But I think it was still my job to spot that and to see that and give it the possibility that it could become something that was going to become part of the game that we were playing. So yeah, I think it's really trying to acknowledge things and respond. And I think it's kind of like some things become self-fulfilling prophecies. So if we decide that someone isn't communicating with us, then we're not really going to be looking out for communication overtures and kind of invitations to interact. If we grant the potential to any communication partner in front of us as someone who is trying to make a connection, then we probably spot it a bit more. And I think there's I think he's Norwegian, a philosopher called Romit Veit, and he says that in order to achieve intersubjectivity, you have to presuppose that it can happen. And I think that's the same with communication. If we see the other person as a potential communication partner, then they could become so. In fact, they will become so. And if you don't, then you'll not spot a movement that a person makes.
Okay, I want to return for the moment and focus on that concept, or that word that was introduced there from the Norwegian philosopher, intersubjectivity, which is really just a way that philosophers and developmental psychologists might describe how two or more minds can interact and connect and be in touch with one another. And it's a phrase or a concept that's been much used in our field and in the field of communication and language development to describe how minds get in connection. And I want to show just little clips of video just now about how communication happens in the early moments, in the early stages of life. And I'm going to show, first of all, a little clip of video that comes from a publication called The Connected Baby. And I'm just going to show just the first few minutes of that video. And the video was put together, or the publication was put together by a woman called Suzanne Zeedyk. That's Zeedyk, who is an American psychologist, but she has spent a large part of her life working here in Scotland. And she put together this film called The Connected Baby to try to understand what happens in those early moments of life. So I'm just going to find the right clip, and hopefully once I find it, I will. Cool. So now I'm going to share my screen. Share sound. Okay. I'll show the whole full screen. Okay, so hopefully you can now see that there is a cover of a book, and this was a book that was edited by Suzanne Zeedyk. And in this book, there are chapters about using what we know about how infants and very young babies develop communication and applying that in the fields of working with older people with dementia, working with people with learning difficulties, working with people who are deafblind, working with people on the autism spectrum, etc., etc. And the clip that's going to come now comes from her film called The Connected Baby.
See it? Oh, that's almost. That was almost. Oh. Yes. Oh. Poke yourself in the face. Mm-hmm. Oh, there it is.
So yeah, that little clip there just shows how the mum and the tiny infant can make this incredible connection with one another. And that, in a way, oops, I can stop sharing my screen, leads in a way to a link to one of my absolute favorite descriptions of what communication is, and it comes from two American writers, Barbara Miles and Marianne Riggio, and they simply just say that communication is connection, and this connection for developmental psychologists is this intersubjectivity, this primary intersubjectivity, and it happens really early on in life. I will share another little clip of video. I'll just bring it up on my screen. And this is, I show this little clip of video if it's going to work. It's refusing to open at the moment. Let me see where it's gone. Hello. Oh, I can hear it but not see it. Oh, there we go. Right. So I will share. Just bear with me 2 seconds. It has disappeared. You'll get to see this clip of video later on anyway, so if it doesn't show at the moment, okay. Can you see a clip which should just be a grey screen at the moment? And
yes, we can see it.
You can see just a little baby.
Yes.
And the little baby is my nephew, one of my nephews, and he's now 8 years old. He was just a few weeks ago, but this is him just a month or so old. And I showed this because he will come back in this presentation later on, but this is one of the earliest kind of interactions. I first met him when he was about 3 hours old, and he was really interactive even in those early moments.
Oh. Yeah. Hello, Caden. Hello. Oh, big yawn.
So yes, I show that only because it just gives me an excuse to show videos of one of my nephews and having a nice interaction with them. As I said, Caden, my nephew, will come back later in this presentation when we look at just some of the activities and things that he gets up to in his life. So the final piece of video that I'm going to show at the moment is one where we may amongst ourselves do some video analysis. So when we watch this video for the first time, I want you to think about the idea of this primary intersubjectivity. How do two people connect with one another? How do they respond to one another? How do they keep an interaction pattern, a communication pattern going, and how do they imitate each other's movements and contributions to the dialogue? So this is a clip of film that comes from the series of, I don't think this will necessarily come across on my screen, but there are a series of booklets that are called Communication and Congenital Deaf Blindness. There are 4 booklets in all that explore the development of communication and how that kind of unfolds in relation to developing communication and language with someone born deaf-blind. I think in Canada, some of you have developed these booklets into a course that really helps explore communication. And again, I'm deliberately using clips of films from these booklets because you can follow all of these up and you can reanalyze things and work things out in your own time and at your own leisure. So this is a clip of a young woman called Ingrid working with her teacher, a man called Gunnar. And this video we will use 2 or 3 times through this next few hours and analyze it from different perspectives. But for the moment, just watch it and think about how do they keep in connection and contact with one another? What are the communication patterns we see unfold? So share my screen.
Også flere ganger, ja. En. 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 Jo, her. Og den. På siden. Å, på siden, ordentlig. Ja, det er litt. Å, sånn litt. Å, jeg har det. Ja, altså litt sånn. Å, både sånn og sånn. Ja. Og den vei, ja. Å. Å, den er litt vanskelig. Ja. Og så da på typen det, akkurat. Ja, så sånn. Å. Å, å. Bare på en? Oi. Og så på den andre her. Åh! Åh! Åh, og sånn, ja. Ja. Ja.
Okay, we will watch this again, but I want to just give a moment and the possibility for anyone to make either comments in the chat function, or if you want to just give us your thoughts, you could put up your hand and the tech team will hopefully be able to allow you to be able to speak, but put comments in the chat function if that is easier. So does anyone have any quick thoughts, ideas about how do they make connection with one another? So we've got a first comment about facial reactions in the conversation. Any other thoughts just about the communication that we see happening in this interaction? Turn taking, yep, and that's a very clear early communication. We saw it in the film with the mum and the baby each taking their turn at whose turn is it to stick out a tongue and responding to one another, and we see that replicated in a way in this interaction with Gunnar and Ingrid. Yep, there's a level of comfort. Mary is telling us it's something that's been practiced, something they've done before perhaps, and it's comfortable. The interaction, the level of trust between the two of them, and trust becomes a really key concept in the idea of early communication development. Yep. Gunnar is following Ingrid's lead in the interaction. That's a contribution from Alana, and I will come back to the idea of following people's lead later on, and link to a really lovely quotation, my favorite quotation of how to be an expert teacher, from a psychologist called Jerry Bruner. I'll come back to that hopefully. If I don't, by the end of our 2 hours, you can ask me a question about it. So I'm just going to watch this clip one more time at the moment, and again, just keep thinking of the communication. So we have another comment. She backed her hand off his momentarily, almost as if listening in more detail. Yeah, that's a really, really nice observation, actually. Unrushed, wait, time provided. I think the timing of these interactions is really crucial, and I will come back to the comment that Teresa had made about the use of her hands, because we're going to do another analysis towards the end of our session today, when we're really focusing just on what the hands are doing. So I'll run this clip just one more time, just so that you just get a sense of the communication aspects, the imitation, the way they're responding, the way they attune to one another, the kind of communication togetherness, the patterns that were developed. And there's a question from Anne. Would you say that the body positioning and the interaction is important to the connection? I'm assuming she has some hearing since the sounds he makes. She responded to. The truth is, Anne, I don't know off the top of my head what level of hearing Ingrid has, but in the books it does give a description, and I'll maybe can check that later. I think in booklet 4 it gives more detail about Ingrid's hearing and vision, but yeah, I think the seating position between the two, I think, is really it's crucial to the connection between them and the sort of level of the proximity and the level of closeness that they can achieve. So yeah, as I say, I'll just run the video and just keep in mind the communication, but you can also begin to turn your attention, because I'm going to introduce a new concept just in a few minutes. And if you begin to think of this as if it were a piece of music happening between the two of them, are they composing something together? Are they improvising together? So as well as thinking about communication, if you now just begin to think about this being a piece of music, a song they're singing together, and what kind of way could you have to describe what's happening?
Også flere ganger, da. En. Jo, her. Og den. På siden. På siden, ordentlig. Ja, det litt. Sånn litt. Jeg har det. Ja, altså litt sånn. Både sånn og sånn. Ja. Og den vei, ja. Den er litt vanskelig. Ja. Sånn da på tuppen, ja. Akkurat. Ja, også sånn. Bare på én? Oi. Og så på den andre hånda, ja. Sånn, ja.
Excellent. Right. Stop sharing that one. I'm going to share another one. Okay, before I play this video, I'll just do a bit of explanation. So I asked you in that second run through of watching the film to keep thinking about communication, but now maybe move on and also think about it as a piece of music. And I'm going to introduce, just again by watching a very short clip from this larger interview that you can find on the Texas website, and a concept that's come from a psychologist that he calls communicative musicality. And this video explains a bit more about it, and then I'll say a bit more when the clip is finished.
There's quite a lot, particularly in terms of early development and early language development. So most of us will be familiar with those films where we see very young babies, some even 10 minutes old, who can interact with the adults around them, sticking out your tongue, wiggling your finger, whatever. And babies can do that right away. And there's a a man who works at the University of Edinburgh, Colwyn Trevarthen, and he's written an awful lot about these early developments, and he's now termed some of this communicative musicality, and it's that real sense that some of those early patterns have very musical qualities, particularly rhythmic qualities. And if you listen to, I don't know, maybe there's a piece of music that always comes to mind, which is the Count Basie Orchestra with Ella Fitzgerald, and they're at the 1972 Santa Monica Jazz Festival, and Ella Fitzgerald begins to improvise, and she improvises with the instrumentalist. So she goes to the trombone player and encourages him to do even more outlandish improvisations, and she's doing her improvisations, and then she moves to Stan Getz on the saxophone and again encourages, and then to, I think, Harry Edison on the trumpet. You can tell I'm a musician, I like all this kind of stuff, but it's really, really complicated the way they're doing it. It's very rhythmic, it's very melodic, it's very musical, but it seems that they're absolutely in tune with one another. And there's the famous quote in our line of work from Barbara Miles and Mariana Riggio that communication is connection. And that's what Ella Fitzgerald is doing with those people. And if we see a teacher interacting with a deaf-blind child just around the feet or around movements of the hand, and there's really nice interaction and they're completely in tune with one another, why is that not communication? And why is that not an incredibly detailed conversation, particularly if it leads to humour and laughter and that sort of sharing of emotion? That seems to me no more or less valid than chatting about last night's soccer results.
Okay, so this idea of communicative musicality. I'm going to go back now and watch the same clip of film with Gunnar and Ingrid, and this time I'm going to encourage you to make comments about the musical nature of what we see. What's the rhythm that's like between the two musicians in this interaction? What could we say about rhythm? What could we say about tension, melody? What could we say about a really key musical kind of form is about themes and variations? What themes and do we see in this clip, and how do each of the partners introduce variations? Who does that? Who is Ella Fitzgerald in this interaction? Is it Gunnar or is it Ingrid? So let's just watch that same clip with Gunnar and Ingrid, and then I'll invite you to throw in some ideas about the interaction. I'll take the sound out so that we're really, oh no, I'll leave the sound on. It is Norwegian they're speaking, and I've not got the version of the I'm not sure on the booklets whether it gives a translation, but it's mostly the hands and the tactile element that we're going to try and focus in here.
Også flere ganger, ja. En. Jo, her. Og den. På siden. På siden, ordentlig. Ja, det litt. Sånn litt. Jeg har det. Ja, altså litt sånn. Både sånn og sånn. Ja. Og den vei, ja. Den er litt vanskelig. Ja. Og sånn da på tuppene, ja. Akkurat. Ja, også sånn. Bare på én? Oi.
So if we were seeing that as a piece of music, how might you describe it? Teresa's come in with a comment. He responds with movement as soon as she makes any movement at all, no matter what it is. And it's wonderful to see her beginning to use her own movements. Nina, the use of the phrase there, call and response. That's again, that's a really key musical idea, that someone introduces an idea and someone responds to that idea. Choirs do it, military marches do it, songs, folk songs from all over the world do it. It's a key idea, that call and response. Crescendo from Sheila. Oh, hello, Sheila. Somebody said you might not make it today. That's great. Crescendo, when she's, again, some of our movements there. Ingrid is probably leading the interaction, the melody, and Gunnar providing the harmony. There's tempo change near the end where they're tapping the whole hands. There's use of pause, and the interaction gets faster and more intense. Now, those who've read some of Gunnar's work elsewhere, he has written quite a lot about what he calls the narrative curve. And it's the sense that intensity and tension can build in an interaction and then it resolves. But you can see that same narrative curve if you read any novel. It will take you on a journey, and the tension builds and builds, and it becomes more and more complex, and then the end of the story will reveal a surprise or the ending that you thought was going to happen. The same happens in every film. There's a narrative structure that builds the intensity and the storytelling, and we see that just in this very short clip of just over a minute. We can see a narrative curve, and I would encourage people to go and read some of Gunnar's material. He also has some videos on the Texas website where he talks about narrative curve. And Anne has come in with a comment. There is a music they make together with their interaction, a togetherness in their interaction, and they are present and fully experiencing the music together. That's a really beautiful description of the interaction. Now, I introduced these two different ideas, and it will come back later when we talk more about the publication from the Nordic Welfare Centre, this Revealing Hidden Potentials. And in doing video analysis in this way, we've already, even though it's just a few minutes of interaction and a few minutes of analysis, we can see already that we can describe the communicative skills and the communicative competencies of both Ingrid and Gunnar. But if we think about it as music, we can also describe the musical skills and the musical competencies that both Ingrid and Gunnar have. And I really liken this to like two jazz musicians improvising, and they're pushing one another all the time. We will come back and watch another this clip again, but from a completely different angle in a short while. But for the moment, I'm going to go on and begin to think about this zone of proximal development. But before I do that, and introduce some of those ideas, I want to just take a moment's pause to see if there are any questions at this stage, not necessarily about these videos, but about anything. And before I do that, I'll maybe just add, there's an additional comment that I've just seen from Nina about the melody and the counterpoint, the right and the left hand being the main interaction point, but they're also the other connected hands and faces providing harmony at the same time. I would encourage any of you, if you're interested ever in doing a master's course or a PhD, these things would be amazing to pick up on some of your observations here and reanalyze these clips as a piece of music, and it would just, yeah, we would learn an enormous amount about both the partners and about just our field here. There's a really about this is one of the ones where I'm going to go off on a slight tangent, because I'm just reminded I was in the Netherlands just a few weeks ago, and one of the students, a man called Håkon Lee, is a Norwegian colleague, and he wrote a thesis about improvisation, and he used a clip of film of an interaction involving a person who's deafblind, and he analysed it as if it were an improvisation that were happening between two people. And that's not one of the ones I have put a reference in, but I will send that at some point later on this evening. So yes, before I move on to the zone of proximal development, I'll just take a little pause to see if there are any questions from anyone at this stage. No, that's fine. That either means it's all making absolute perfect sense, or I've completely confused everyone. And either of those would be really good, because in confusion, that's where learning happens. So that will be great. Oh, hello, Christine. Lovely to hear from you. You see music, I see two dancers. That's excellent. Yes, one is leading and one is following. How does the leading and interaction from the partner enhance the dance? I really like that analogy of this being a dance, because that could be yet another way that we could analyze any of the interactions with people. We could see it as a communication exchange, as a musical song. We could see it as a dance and an interaction between people, and that would be really yeah, super. The roles and benefits of music therapy. There's quite a lot written in our field about the use of music, and there is a long history of a colleague from Denmark, Inger Rodbro, that's R-O-D B-R-O-E, and Inger, along with other colleagues, has written about music in the field of deaf blindness, and there are some students at the university in the Netherlands who are doing musical theses at the moment, but there is also some interesting stuff written by a man who is himself deaf-blind, a man called Russ Palmer. He is English but lives in Finland with his wife called Rita Latinen. That's L-A-H-T-I-N-E-N. That might not be right. Latinen says L-A-H-T-I-N-E-N. Again, I will follow it up to Alana with a proper reference. But anyway, Russ, who is himself deaf-blind, is also a really fantastic musician, and he's written and presented about how he uses music in his life, and he's written some really super stuff. I will come back and to your comment about confusion is where learning happens, because that comes from a psychologist who I will mention in maybe 15 or 20 minutes time. But for the moment then, I will go back to my presentation and begin to think about this zone of proximal development. So hopefully that is now shared from the current slide. Yep. So the concept of this zone of proximal development comes from the Russian psychologist Vygotsky, and he used it as a way of describing the sort of the distance between the actual and the potential developmental levels of a child, and this gap can be bridged with the help of more competent others. So in the diagram that's on the screen at the moment, in the very inner core of this diagram, we have what the learner can do him or herself. And then the very outer core, the red core, is what the learner cannot yet do. And the middle green circle is what the learner can do if they were given guided assistance from another. And he called this the so-called zone of proximal development. And it's really influenced developmental psychology. And there are lots of terms and theories that have been developed. So a man called David Wood, really based on some of the thinking from Jerry Bruner, has this idea that learning is scaffolded. And scaffolding is a term that is frequently used in our field and in education in general. Barbara Rogoff and some colleagues in one of their publications, they describe this concept of guided participation. Tharp and Gallimore, they describe what they call assisted performance. And Mercer has this idea that children are guided to construct knowledge. And in whatever way this learning process is described, there's this kind of underlying assumption that the more competent other has an end goal in mind. And if you're interested in reading more about that, there is an article that I wrote in the Deafblind International Review a number of years ago, and you can follow up all of those references. But now when we come to think of people who are our communication partners who are deaf-blind, then perhaps this kind of asymmetrical relationship that guides a person who is deaf-blind towards the language used by the so-called more competent communication partner, perhaps that's not the best model for us now to think about. And I'm going to show again a short clip of video that comes from, I'll stop sharing the screen just there. Yeah, I'm going to show just another clip that comes from the Texas website, where I begin to introduce an idea that comes from a father of a young deaf-blind man, and beginning to think about a double-sided zone of proximal development. And we'll explore that in a bit more detail after this film. So I'll just set everything up and hopefully it will work. Share sound. Okay. I'm trusting now that that's there.
There's probably nowhere in the world yet where a natural tactile language has spontaneously developed. It just, and where they have developed, it will be because teachers and people with deaf blindness working together have developed languages. And I think that it leaves, if I'm a teacher and I've got a person with deaf blindness as my pupil, then of course I'm more knowledgeable about language, perhaps, than this 4-year-old child in front of me. But this 4-year-old child in front of me will be much more knowledgeable about living in a world where touch is your primary source of contact with the world. And so part of my job as a teacher might be to try and impart some of my skill, knowledge and experience to the child, but I have to also become the learner and let the child, even if the child is 4, the chance to teach me something. And we have to learn from each other if we really want to begin to work out how a kind of natural tactile language can develop. And there's a man called Norman Brown, who was the father of a young man who was deafblind, and he was a real scholar of the Russian psychologist Vygotsky, and Vygotsky speaks about this zone of proximal development, which is the kind of gap that exists between what a child can achieve on their own and what they could achieve with the expert guidance of somebody else, and that could be learning the piano or to talk or walk or anything. So this zone of proximal development is the sort of gap that you can get over with somebody else's support. And Norman Brown writes about, in our field, we should think of a double-sided zone of proximal development where, of course, there are parts for me to help the child to bridge this gap, but there are also parts where the child can help me to bridge the gap that I have in my knowledge. And as teachers, or as professionals, as parents, as communication partners working alongside people, then I think we have to leave at the door our egos and that sense that we know all the answers and we have all the answers, because when it comes to developing a tactile language, then none of us will have that, all of the answer, because it wasn't my first language or a natural language for me.
So again, I'm curious to know what people think about this idea of a double-sided zone of proximal development, because I trained as a teacher, and I can think that this idea of a double-sided zone of proximal development is at one and the same time incredibly inspirational and allows me to be quite free, but at the same time I can see it as being enormously challenging, because it's saying to me that you don't have all the answers. You don't actually need to know all the answers, and the child or the other person you're working alongside, this is not just necessarily in relation to deaf blindness, it could actually relate to any field of education or any health and social care field, where we enter into a kind of genuine partnership with the other, where we learn from one another, and we make ourselves as a teacher vulnerable and open, because we're not expected to know all the answers, but we have to really listen to other people. So what I'm just curious about people's reaction to that. Do you think it's a liberating concept, or do you think it's a challenging concept? I think that's right, Beverly. The best teachers are always trying to understand how the student understands. Yes, and another contribution, every situation is unique, and that's been this person's experience as an intervener. Lots of fun at times, challenging and draining, all of those things. I'm going to share the screen again in terms of there's some additional concepts that I take really from this idea of a double-sided zone of proximal development. And there's a really super writer, not connected with our field, but I think she's got an enormous contribution to make to our field, a writer called Brené Brown. And she does write a lot about vulnerability and the sense of any of us making ourselves vulnerable, and that allows the space for real learning to take place. But she's written a really super book that she calls Daring Greatly, the Power of Vulnerability. And I think it's a really super book, and actually it's a really great place and a great concept for us, I think, to have as professionals, as teachers, as interveners, is to allow the other person to teach us just as much as we learn, as much as we are doing the teaching. And there is a Dutch writer, Hubert Hermans, and he writes about a sort of he writes about philosophy, but one of the ideas that I've taken from a book that he wrote called The Dialogical Self, and he towards the end of the book he writes that we should not just tolerate uncertainty, but we should really revel in the wisdom of uncertainty. That if we really enjoy the idea that we don't have to have all the answers, then real learning and real kind of connection can take place between people. And finally, I'm going to go back to Jerry Bruner, the American developmental psychologist, who has given what for me is the best description of being a first-class teacher, which is to lead by following, and that was one of the comments that was made on the Ingrid Gunnar video before about this following and leading. But so for Jerry Bruner, the best teacher leads by following, and I think that's a really great description. He is also the developmental psychologist who wrote about why confusion is a really good place to be, and he's written about the cognitive trouble, he calls it, when you don't know an answer, and when that happens, then you seek out an answer, and greater developments and learning can take place. But for me, this zone of proximal development, or this double-sided zone of proximal development, it really allows us to see in our field that it's not about imposing language. If we're thinking about developing language in our communication partnerships, it's not about imposing language from the outside, whichever partner attempts to impose it, but instead it's about co-creating new languages in the tactile medium, and languages that have to emerge from the contributions of both partners, and they're really rooted in the kind of the lived experience and the cultural experience of both partners. And so all of that skill and experience has to come into the interaction, and then really effective partnerships will kind of reveal the potentials and new competencies in both partners. And that leads on to this relatively recent publication. I think it was 2019 or 2020 that the Cognition Network in various European countries produced this publication called Revealing Hidden Potentials. It followed, I'll come back to this slide, but it followed an earlier publication which was called Guidelines for the Assessment of Cognition in Relation to Congenital Deafblindness. And both of these are freely available as PDFs to download from the Nordic Welfare website. And again, the links have been passed on to the team in Canada. But I'm going to go back to this book, Revealing Hidden Potentials, because we can really learn ways in which the cognitive abilities of people can really be made visible. And this book argues that cognition and people's cognitive abilities can be found at the meeting place between people, and it becomes evident in the interactions between people through the activities they do, and this reveals the potentials that people have. So if you were thinking about assessment, then it's not about having a one-size-fits-all assessment tool that provides all the answers, especially since lots of assessment tools have been developed against the backdrop of what a seeing, hearing child is able to do. But instead, this publication gives many examples of how humour and playfulness can be used to make visible the cognitive and communicative potentials of a person who is deafblind. It can give examples of how climbing a wall or rock climbing can help reveal aspects of a person's cognitive abilities. It gives examples of how swimming or water play was used as a vehicle for helping reveal people's kind of abilities. But for me, one of the things that's really clear is that the cognitive potentials of a child or a person, anybody, they become visible if you first have a belief that they are there to be found, nurtured and developed. And if you recall on one of the videos I showed earlier on, one of the film clips where I talked about the Norwegian philosopher Rometveit, who said something along the lines of, for intersubjectivity to happen at all, you first have to imagine that it's possible. And I think we can take that same notion when we're looking at analysing any videos or interactions or thinking about our connections and partnerships with people that we're often in a professional relationship with. If we set out to find particular capacities and abilities, then you're more likely to find them. And it absolutely, this approach in this publication asks us to think of asset-based approaches to assessment as opposed to deficit-based approaches to assessment. So instead of trying to find all the things that a person can't do, and there are many things that all of us can't do, it's much more productive and meaningful to find the things that a person is skilled at, is competent at, or could be competent at. And that helps me think about some of the great teachers I've come across working in this field. I already mentioned John McGuinness, but I had the pleasure of working with Gunnar Vega, who we've seen on some of the films, Bernadette van den Tillert, who came from the Netherlands but now lives in the States, and the really amazing teacher and philosopher in our field, Barbara Miles, who taught me an enormous amount just about communication and challenged thinking. But in engaging with people, then that's when almost new competencies get revealed in myself because of these interactions and these connections that we have. And of course, some of the best teachers I've had have been people with deafblindness who I have met over the years, who've taught me if I have any ambitions to be an effective communication partner, then the only way I can really achieve that is to see the person in front of me as an equal, competent communication partner, and we really learn off of one another. This double-sided zone of proximal development is working there, and in that way we reveal even more about ourselves. So again, I'm just going to take a pause at this stage, just to give anybody an opportunity to ask any questions, make some comments.
Yep,
I'm aware
Paul.
the chat was, yep.
Yeah, hi, it's Annie here.
Hi, Annie.
Yes, there were 4, starting with, if you scroll up, starting with Alana.
Yep,
Alana,
see
Christine,
that, yep.
yeah, some really great comments there, if we could touch on those.
I'm trying to, yeah, so Alana says it's humbling. You have to acknowledge that you may not have the answers and have to learn to communicate in a way that's not your strength, or that you're learning along with the person. And I mean, I absolutely agree with that, Alana. And one of the things that I think I've learned, particularly from another Norwegian colleague called Jude Nicholas, I've learned an enormous amount from his writings and from discussions with him about touch. And when we're thinking about these, developing connections in the tactile modality, I said that the lived experience of someone born deafblind is that the sense of touch is their principal connection, and it's a stunningly rich sense with which to get information about the world. And I used to think that a seeing hearing partner maybe wasn't as skilled in touch, but the truth is that touch is a sense that's enormously important to all of us. It's likely the first sense that developed for us, and it's likely to be the last sense that fades for us later in life. And it remains really important. Some of you will have heard me say before that as an example of the power of touch, if someone came in to this room where I'm sitting at the moment and had some really bad news to pass on to me, something that was really traumatic and difficult, there's not enough words in the dictionary that could capture what a hug would do at that same time. And so somehow or other, touch really allows human emotions and connection. So it's true that sometimes the tactile modality might not be our strength in the same way that neurologically and cognitively, and I will come back to that later, for a person born deafblind, but we can really get close to it. But yes, I think it is humbling, and for me, it's not always easy to walk into an interaction and think, I don't need to know everything, and I'm happy to learn from each other. As a comment from Christine, the bond that is created when the deafblind student know that you will do anything and everything to understand him or her, even if you make mistakes at first. Knowing that you will take the time to understand is so important, and taking the time to figure things out. And for me, Christine, that gets to the real nub of trust. And you have to, again, if we go back to Romabite's idea that to be intersubjective, you have to imagine that such a thing is possible. I think for the person who is deafblind, they have to have a real faith and a trust that their communication partner is willing to be there and make the connection, even if we can't understand every gesture or every sign or what the person is trying to tell us. We can give a really strong message that I'm really, really trying here. I'm still with you. And I don't think it's about being misunderstood. It's more of it's the real problem. The real problem is when the other person gives up, as in we, as the teacher, and say, oh, she's too hard to understand. I think we can give a strong message in our interactions that we will stay there, we'll try and solve this, we'll try and work it out together. Teachers are always, or should always be, learning from their students too. So to me, a double-sided zone of proximal development makes sense. You're right, it's not a new idea. The term double-sided zone of proximity is good though, and thought-provoking. Norman Brown, the man I mentioned, I first heard him speak about a double-sided zone of proximal development, probably somewhere around about 2005, maybe even a few years earlier, and he had been working on it. And he primarily came to the idea because of his interactions with his son. And he could describe very eloquently how much he learned about being in the world from his son, and he learned more about touch and the tactile modality and a different way of experiencing the world by the connections with his son. Scott has written that professionals have a hard time letting go of what they think they know. When they do, they will be surprised by what they can learn from those trying to communicate without knowing what the profession read in the book. The absolute best interactions, and I hinted at that from the people with deaf blindness that I've learned from, the best is to roll your sleeves up and get in there and it's kind of like being fellow travelers, and you've got to journey through this life together and work out what each other means. Yep.
Paul, this is
Yep.
Alana. I
Yep.
just wanted to let everybody know, and because I actually find this Scott's comment really powerful, because Scott is a person with congenital deaf blindness, and this is his lived experience.
Yeah,
So it really from when I saw him posted it, really gets to me, right?
yeah, no, that's thank you for letting me know that, Alana. That is, yep, it is really powerful. I think I've not gone into detail because I didn't have I've got some videos of me interacting with people that I work alongside here in Scotland, and it is really from those people. And there's one man in particular, and for people who really want to follow it up, I think there's a link in some of the stuff that's been sent to the PhD thesis that I wrote and the research. But one of the young men that I worked alongside and learned an enormous amount from was a young man who is congenitally deafblind, called Peter. And Peter, because of his particular condition, has never had vision since the day he was born. He was born without an eye, and he really hasn't had vision ever. But we see in some of the videos that we analysed and the interactions that he had with the key people in his life, that he was learning signs that were coming from people, but he very often signed them back out into space. And somewhere in his life, he had learned, found out, realised that his communication partners could respond to things if he signed out into space, but he was directing all of those signs and gestures to a sensitive modality that he had never, ever had. And that really stopped the staff team up short, because they were thinking, if this man is happy to use language and a sensitive modality that he has never had, it is incredibly rude of us as a staff team, a support team, if we don't use a language in a modality that he and we have, touch. And it was a real, it was a really profound learning experience for the staff team, to think that Peter was making more of an effort sometimes than they were as professionals. That was a real double-sided zone of proximal development. There's a good few comments here, Beverly. There must also be a need to consider not only a person's method of communication, but their methods of cognitive processing. Now, I'm probably not going to go into too much detail about cognitive processing, but I will mention a really fantastic publication that's again come out of the Nordic countries, the Tactile Working Memory Scale. And there are quite a few colleagues in Canada who have recently trained to use the Tactile Working Memory Scale, and that is a fabulous tool. And again, it's downloadable, but it's a fabulous tool for understanding cognitive processing, but really understanding what it looks like in the tactile modality, so that gestures and actions and people's real cognitive skills and cognitive abilities are not overlooked. So I would recommend people read the publication. Is my PowerPoint still on the screen? Because if so, if
Yes,
it's
it
still
is.
sharing, that's the name of the publication, the Tactile Working Memory Scale. It comes also from the Nordic Welfare Centre, and it's a really super publication. So I'm going to go back to my comments now. I'm not sure where I'd got to. Anne has appreciating what you're sharing. The communication comes in many different ways. When we're fully present with others, then true communication can happen. And I think that sense of truly being present and truly being there in the moment is an absolutely crucial concept for us. Teresa, a kind of linked comment, perhaps, one must always be on task to ensure the communications are not missed. The slightest glance, movement, vocalization, if noticed, can open up a whole world of interaction and communication. And that goes way back to the very first film, that anything has the potential to be communicative if it's responded to. And an additional comment from Scott, and thank you for coming back in Scott. I spent so much time adjusting to the ideas of professionals that I had to stop learning sometimes and just let them do whatever. I learned from those who got to know me. I think you must have an enormous contribution to make to the thinking of colleagues and professionals in Canada, and it reminds me a lot, Scott, of some of the work that's coming out of the States, but there's a sort of parallel process happening in Europe. So in the US at the moment, there's a movement called the pro-tactile, and it's about really developing a language that is almost the first language of people who are deaf-blind. And I can imagine a world in 50 years' time when a tactile language, the pro-tactile language, and in Europe there's an equivalent thing called social haptic communication. They're not entirely exactly the same, but there's real similarities. But I think that pro-tactile has the potential, because it's really been driven by and from the lived experience of deaf blindness, and pro-tactile tactile language will look as different from ASL or British Sign Language as a signed language is from a spoken language. And I think it's really there's some really exciting times in our field. And if I just finish this bit by imagining this as a giant double-sided zone of proximal development, we will not get to really understand about deaf blindness unless it has the lived experience right there in the centre of some of those discussions. So thank you, Scott, for adding in your thoughts. Now I'm totally lost where I am and where my thinking is going. So let's go back now, and I'm going to go back to the video with Ingrid and Gunnar. And now we're thinking, we've thought about it as communication, we've thought about it as a piece of music. So we're now going to really think, what are we learning about Ingrid's cognitive abilities? What are we learning about Gunnar's contributions to that in this interaction? And if you were describing the potentials, however you want to think about those, what kind of competencies, what abilities, what skills do we see both for Gunnar and Ingrid, but also for them together as a partnership. So I will close down this video and come back to, just give me 2 seconds. I have to stop a PowerPoint and end that show and go to this one. So sorry, they had disappeared off my screen, but they are now back. So here we go. So one more watch of this, and you're thinking cognitive abilities, cognitive potentials. What can we see in the video? And those of you on the call who've done the tactile working memory scale, then you might have used this video or similar videos in your training course.
Også flere ganger, ja.
Oh.
Igjen.
Did the screen appear? I'm getting the sound, but no picture.
I'm not getting a picture. No.
Right. Let me close it down completely. I will stop sharing for the moment, and if you give me 2 seconds, I'll reopen it back up. And the technology was behaving itself so beautifully all day, but now it's decided to not play with me. Let's see if this one opens. This is very strange. I'm trying to do it a different way, so if you just bear with me for 2 seconds, that will give you time to contemplate cognition. And one of the things you can do when we watch it this time, and hopefully it will start. Yay! Right. Okay, I'm ready to share. So yes, when one thing that can aid perhaps the analysis this time is to count how many different hand movements, finger movements, both Gunnar and Ingrid do. If you've got a pen and paper, you could scribble some down, but so you're just really trying to think, how are they using their hands and how many different movements can we see and how could we describe those movements? So.
Også flere ganger, ja.
Oh.
Igjen.
No, whenever I play it, the visions go. So I'm going to. Open file. Right. Can you see the video now?
You've got to share the screen.
Yeah. No.
Også flere ganger, ja. Igjen. Jo, her. Og den. På siden. Å, på siden, ordentlig. Ja, det er litt. Å, sånn litt. Å, jeg har det. Ja, altså litt sånn. Å, både sånn og sånn. Ja. Og den vei, ja. Å, den er litt vanskelig. Ja. Og sånn da på tuppen, ja. Akkurat. Ja, så sånn. Åh. Bare på én? Oi. Og så på den andre, ja. Åh! Og sånn, ja. Ja. Also,
Okay, I'm just going to let it run again because I think there was a slight stutter at the start the last time. So again, just try and capture as many different kinds of movements you see. How many ways do the hands go? Do they go left, to the right, up, down? How would you describe the different movements?
flere ganger, ja. En. 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 Jo, her. Og den. På siden. Og på siden, ordentlig. Ja. Altså litt. Og sånn litt. Å, jeg har det. Ja, altså litt sånn. Både sånn og sånn. Ja. Og den vei, ja. Og den der litt vanskelig. Ja. Og så da på tuppene, ja. Akkurat. Ja, også sånn. Bare på én? Oi. Og så på den andre der. Og sånn, ja. Ja. Ja.
Stop sharing there. So we have a first comment from Teresa about Ingrid is moving her hand back to the fingertips at one point in the film, and that shows a change in the topic of discussion. But in many other ways did you see the hands being used in this clip? There is quite a lot of work. Oh, here we go. We've got a left hand, closed hand, fingertips, full fingers, hand moving left, right, up, down, flat hand. So there's a huge number of different ways. Now, if we related that back to the musical terms we were thinking before, we could see a theme and a variation. So perhaps a theme is just the original, clasping your hands like this, but then it becomes individual fingertips, it becomes moving, it becomes this way, it goes. And so we could think of that as themes and variations. But if we're focusing in on the touch, we can see all of those different ways. And sometimes it's a very fine touch. It's one fingertip at a time feeling another fingertip. Sometimes there's much more force applied. Sometimes it's very forceful and there's kind of pushing, and then there's some clapping and comes in. And again, sometimes the clapping is gentle and sometimes it is more pronounced and it's faster and it's much more movement. And there's a point when Ingrid has done something, I think Gunnar has hit his hand onto hers, and you can feel her just kind of feeling along there, and you can all do this yourself at some point, but if you really slap your hand, you will feel a tingle and a sensation here. And so there's just a huge amount of different movements are different happening that are happening there. And I'm just aware another comment has come in. There's a right hand, a closed hand, flat hand, more fast movements. Yeah, I mean, these are really great observations. There are dozens and dozens of different variations that we see here. Now, again, we won't have time today to explore the whole aspect of touch, and particularly the neurological things that are happening here. And if you really want to follow that up, then you'll get some information in the time. A man called Jude Nicholas has written an enormous amount in our field about the tactile modality, and particularly what is happening neurologically for a person who has a lived experience of deaf blindness. And when I look at this video of Ingrid and Gunnar, and if you separate out all those subtle different movements, the way the fingers are moving, is it on the fingertip, is it on the palm of the hand, is it clenched fingers, is it going up, is it going down, is it going left, is it going right, is it gentle, is it firm? All of those things will be building up a really incredibly rich neurological set of, just what's happening in Ingrid's brain will just be stunningly rich. And in the same way that for those of us who learned spoken language, we may practice sounds and build those into the kind of like morphemes and the components of words, and then join those words into sentences, and we get ever more complex. In a way, in these videos, and when we really, really look at the use of touch for people born deaf-blind, then I think we can see those same fundamental building blocks of a tactile language being developed. And for Ingrid, she won't have any more like receptors, nerve endings in her fingers than perhaps me, but what she might have is thousands of more neurological connections about what each of those different touches mean. So when she feels something in her fingertip, that's probably thousands of previous memories come flooding back, and she can use that in a neurologically more powerful way perhaps than me. And again, that just helps me to go right back to the zone of proximal development, this double-sided. If I can't get the same richness of in a neurological sense of touch, how can I learn that from Ingrid or from other people with deaf blindness that I work alongside? So I would really, I would recommend that you follow up some thinking from Jude Nicholas, and perhaps that your colleagues in Canada who are now have trained in the tactile working memory scale, that there'll perhaps be courses coming in Canada about using that, because that stuff is really, really exciting, and where it can go. But I think one of the main ideas I think I'm trying to get at through watching the same piece of video from many different perspectives is that if we take a theoretical model, or we take an educational model, we can apply that into videos, and we can watch the same video from many different perspectives, so that we find the things that a person is incredibly good at, and we can find those potentials, and we find those abilities. And it's why assessment is best to happen in real activities that a person does every day with people that they know really well, with people that they trust, and really powerful communication connections, because then more competencies and more skills of a person will be revealed. And that will take me on to the sort of final idea that I want to look at today, and then hopefully we can then draw things all together into one kind of cohesive whole. But I'll just quickly share my screen so I can go back to my PowerPoint. So this this is a really, really super book. You can get it as a an ebook, so it is easily got hold of from various sellers on the internet and whatever. But it's a really magnificent book written by this Norwegian father, Svein Olaf Kolset, about the story of his connection with his son, who is deaf-blind. And for me, this book, which is called An Exceptional Fellow, it can really help us to find language that can describe our role and our relationship with people who are deaf-blind. It can help us to think again about what it is to be a teacher, if that's what we are, or an intervener. It can help us to find language to describe the skills and the competencies that we're discovering that people with deafblindness have. And I want to return to the I'm trying to think now, actually. I was going to, return to the idea from before of Jerry Bruner, this idea of leading by following. And I think it can help us. One of my colleagues in Scotland, a man called John Reid, he did his master's thesis at the Dutch University about what professionals call themselves and how that can impact the kind of interactions that you have with someone. And he was a part of our arts team for a while in Scotland. And for him, if you saw the person coming into the room as an artist, a musician, then that would really impact in a positive way on the kind of interactions that would unfold. And I've spoken before about one of my other colleagues, a man called David McCluskey in Scotland, who does a lot of our music support. And again, for him, when someone walks into his room, he doesn't see a person with autism, a person with deafblindness, a person with any complex healthcare needs. He just sees a musician stepping over the threshold. And that really allows a kind of musical interaction, an improvisation, a composition between the two of them just to develop. So in that book, An Exceptional Fellow, there are chapters in it called The Swimmer, The Skier, A Hero and His Family. And in using those kind of terms, we can see that the father is moving well beyond seeing his son as someone with deafblindness. Instead, he is just a son who is a swimmer, a skier, and ultimately a hero. And that changes how all of us then can see his son. And early in the book, it describes the long stay in hospital in the first few weeks of his son's life. And his son is called Torgeir. And early in the book, he writes about the day Torgeir had won the first battle. He no longer needed an additional oxygen supply. We could hold him for the first time since the day he was born. It was indescribable, a banality for parents of healthy children, but a 7-mile stride for our little hero. And later in the book, he describes how Torgeir had an internal drive worthy of a polar explorer. And in the chapter, The Skier, he describes how those trips can now be 5 to 6 hours long. And he writes, the 995-meter peak of Snorvelin has been scaled. Not exactly Mount Everest, but Torgeir felt like Edmund Hillary. And one of my favourite parts of the book is when he describes how his family moved from Norway to the United States. And he describes the politeness of Americans and their willingness to come up and chat. But he particularly remembers the occasions when the family found Torgeir to be a door opener. And that's a really positive statement. Tor here was the one who could help the family make connections. And that really changes how the rest of us feel about his son. So we can choose words or language that allows a person to grow, and a language that allows the person to be seen for the exceptional fellow that they are. So I'm now going to try and find some clips, if I can get my video to work. My video program has obviously decided that an hour and 3/4 is more than enough time to work for the one evening. Now it's going, so there we go. We're up to the part where I need to get to. So I'm going to share a part of, I call this part based on his book, The Exceptional Fellows. And this is a sequence of clips with my two of my youngest nephews, Caden, who you saw earlier on, and his little brother, Dylan. And this is the clip from before, and this is one of an early interaction between myself and Caden when he was just a few months old. And I'll show it again just so you can see the beginning of a connection.
Yeah. Hello, Caden. Hello.
And here is Caden when he's about 4. And he's flying a kite on the beach just outside my house.
You're doing a great job. Wowee! Look at you! Wow! How high have you got it?
And he's passed on those kite flying skills to his little brother, Dylan. And this is him showing him how to do it. Now, we often go what we now call bear hunts in the local forest. That's not very far from here. And sometimes we then go bigger adventures. So after looking for the bears, we go big walks and would take us up the hill. This was last summer on a sunny day, and this is us up at the top. In fact, it's 2 summers ago, up at the top of the hill having our picnic. And this is Dylan out exploring the beach. But when we're out doing these things, we often use language like adventurers or rock climbers. And Caden thinks of himself as an expert rock climber. And recently, he's been teaching his little brother how to do rock climbing. This is out one evening on a ghost hunt when it gets nice and dark. And we're sometimes in this little hut, or we're in the bushes, we take our torches, we make light patterns, and we're out there just having fun, all the while trying to search for ghosts. And we use language all the time, like adventurers, ghost hunts, bear hunts, and we're not really just going out for walks. And I think when we begin to use language, then that's how they begin to see themselves as adventurers, going out there in the big wide world and taking on the world. And it's just the 3 of us out there in the zone together, trying to just be fellow travelers in our journey through life. And I use that as an example because it's exactly the same as with Svein Olaf Kolset in his description of his son. And it's something that we can adopt in our work. So particularly when we're thinking about revealing potentials, we can keep some of this exceptional fellow language in our minds. And that's what we're really trying to reveal in all of the people that we work alongside in whatever capacity, whether that's a child we're teaching or a colleague or a family. We can attempt to see the exceptional and reveal the kind of hidden potentials, the competencies, the skills that are there. And the more we set out to look for them, the more we will set out to find them. So we're coming towards about the last 5 minutes of the presentation, and you're all probably now desperate for a cup of coffee or a break. So I wanted to again just pause and give an opportunity for any questions and comments at this stage, because we've covered quite a few ideas today, and overall I'm really just given this idea that all of us can become exceptional communication partners, but we have to be open to the learning that will flow between both of us, or as many of us as there are in any kind of communication interactions. And we owe it to our fellow travelers on this learning journey, kind of to equip them to be the best they can, to reveal their exceptional nature, because in turn that reveals our exceptional nature. So a few minutes for some questions, comments, thoughts from anyone. I'm never sure if a stunned silence is a good thing or whether you're just writing so much in the comments that it's taking a while. Staying in the moment to enjoy adventures. Yep, that's absolutely the way to go. I appreciate how you bring in fun into the communication. Yes, I think if our day-to-day lives aren't fun, they can't be fun all the time, but we have to have an element of that in our interactions, and we have to find. I know in St Scotland we have an outdoors program, we have a big arts program, as well as just ordinary day-to-day living where you have to cook your dinner and do your washing and do the shopping, but we have to find fun activities that really make someone tick, that really make it worth jumping out of bed in the morning. So fun, I think, needs to be somewhere in there in all of our work. Any other last minute thoughts? Teresa says it is always wonderful. Oh, well, thank you to have you share with us. If I have a wealth of knowledge, then that's only because I've been because I was 60 yesterday, so I'm now getting on in life. But all of the learning I have had has come from working with colleagues the length and breadth of the world, and working particularly the learning I've had from people with deafblindness that I've learned from over the years. And Scott has written, thank you for reminding people that listening comes in many forms. No, thank you, Scott. Yes, I think that comment about slowing down, that really does provide opportunities. We haven't said too much about the sort of the timing and the pacing of things, but I think that is another key aspect of, and it doesn't mean that the tactile modality always has to be a slow modality, but I think in our interactions and in learning, we do have to learn to go at a pace that allows us to gather as much of the interaction that's happening. And there was a comment before about the communication could be happening anywhere in someone's body, and it could be a facial expressions, a vocalization, a twitch of the toe, a move of a finger. You have to be kind of observant to all of that, and timing and pacing can allow us to do that. There's an additional comment there about the video analysis being a really great experience, and I would really encourage people to video themselves in the interactions, but be gentle on yourself when you watch it, because finding your skills and competencies is just as important as finding it in whoever is your communication partner. I think the video analysis allows all of us to find really what's happening in an interaction, and to go back into the next interaction with all of that learning in our minds, so that we can push on and move on. Christine has said she's been sharing with colleagues that we need to start with the child, and those who don't come from our field try to find a tool to force communication, teach the child when a child is communicating, and we need to pay attention. Yeah, absolutely. I mentioned a colleague from Denmark, Inger Rodbro, before, and I was speaking about her just last week at another meeting. And when she was in Scotland a good number of years ago, there was a discussion going on between the professionals in the meeting about which curriculum, whether the curriculum used in Scottish schools was better or more productive than the curriculum used in the schools in England. And Inger let this discussion go for a while, and then she stepped in and said, I think it's really interesting what you're discussing about a curriculum. We have one in Denmark as well. We just call it the child. And it was really a good learning and a good reminder, which is exactly what you're saying, I think, Christine. Well, thank you, Mary, for saying that you've had much to ponder. That's good. And if some of it didn't make sense, that would be even better, because then, as Jerry Bruner says, that's when the learning will happen. And Linda has commented, we need to be humble and observe, observe, observe. And we could listen to you, even with a phone book. I'll maybe do that the next time. But thank you all for participating, and the comments have been really excellent. We weren't sure how easy it would be to be interactive, but actually it's really proved to be very fruitful. So thank you all for your contributions to the video analysis and to the discussions. I was right at the start. It's always a pleasure to work with colleagues from Canada. And I see Alana has appeared on the screen, so my time is up.
Thank you so much, Paul. This was such an inspiring presentation, and thank you for inviting us into conversation about being an effective communication partner. One of the key phrases that I'm taking away is that communication is connection, and it's really important that we remember we're equal communication partners, and we're revealing the potential in each other. It's not one-sided. This goes both ways. So we're each learning a language that is not necessarily our first language. So thank you for that reminder, and inviting people to sit on that, to think on that. Thank you for also, I really appreciated is it an analogy or a metaphor of comparing interactions as if they're pieces of music? I think that will probably be very inspiring for people to think about it that way. It's a beautiful interaction. It's musical. There's, as the discussion showed, there's so many elements to it. So thank you for that.